Welcome to Tipping Points, where we ask key questions about how we balance conservation and development. This webinar series is an initiative of Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation, and they usually take place on the last Thursday of the month at 1 p.m. I'm Anthony Turton, a professor at the Center for Environmental Management at the University of Free State, and I have the pleasure of being today's facilitator for the 20th OGRC Tipping Points webinar. Our focus today is on South Africa's water crisis and how it is accelerating beyond our capacity to fix it. How bad is it? And what realistically can be done about it? I'm glad to be here with you and look forward to a productive and insightful discussion. Please be aware that this session is being recorded and will be available on the Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation YouTube channel. And this is also where you can catch up on webinars you may have missed in the past. To ensure you don't miss out on any upcoming webinars and other important announcements, I encourage you to sign up for the OGRC quarterly newsletter and also stay tuned to OGRC's social media channels. We are excited to have a very good turnout today. Please continue to introduce yourselves and engage in the chat box. Don't hesitate to use the chat box for any questions at any time throughout the webinar. They are being constantly monitored in order to help us to adapt to the request as they come from the audience. So let's start off now. We are exactly on time. I'm pleased to introduce our panel of experts. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Professor Kassan has not been able to make it today, but we will make the necessary adjustment. So I'll start off by introducing Professor Sylvester Mpandeli. He has a PhD and an executive manager of the Water Research Commission. He's also a adjunct professor at the University of Venda. Mariette Liefferink, well-known activist. When the Royal Dutch Shell bought over 20 properties in Bryanston, where Mariette Liefferink lived with her family, they unknowingly kicked off a life of activism. Last year, she was awarded the Mail and Guardian's Greening the Future Award and the award for the most committed and influential member of the SDG 6 Water and Sanitation Sector Leadership Group. Before I invite each panelist to share their insights, I just want to frame the conversation in terms of the ideas of a tipping point. A tipping point is an important thing in the context of ecosystems. Ecosystems are complex entities. They're multiple variables. And whenever you have to integrate more than 3 variables, the final result always ends up in a divergence instead of a convergence. But we reach certain critical thresholds beyond which the system radically changes its dynamic equilibrium, for want of a better word. So tipping points are important things. They're not clearly defined, but they are thresholds of concern beyond which systems change rapidly. It is my professional opinion that we are seeing the tipping points happening globally, but particularly in South Africa. The global tipping point, in my view, is how we transition from a linear extractive economy into a circular value-added beneficiation type of economy. And of course, this is playing out in different parts of the world, but acutely so in South Africa, where we've reached the absolute finite limit of our available water resources. And we're transitioning from an extractive mining economy into something that we don't quite yet know what it is. Some people talk about the 4th Industrial Revolution, et cetera, but we're not quite clear where we're going there. So it's my view as a scientist working in this space that we are reaching certain thresholds now beyond which change is becoming so rapid that our institutional capacity to adapt is not up to speed. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to just open up now with an invitation to each panelist to start this discussion by giving insights into the topic based on their background and experiences. Please ask the speakers just to stick to the time because we are working on a very, very tight time schedule. So the first speaker is Professor Sylvester Mpandeli from the Water Research Commission. This is a very important body because this is one of the only entities that I'm aware of in the world where taxes that are levied from the bulk sale of water are invested into creating a national body of knowledge. That's what the Water Research Commission is about. So Professor Mpandeli literally represents that growing national intellectual property for water management and all the issues around water. So Professor Mpandeli, I welcome you to the floor, sir.
Good afternoon, Prof and colleagues. My name is Sylvester Mpandeli from the Water Research Commission. I've joined WRC 11 years ago, but I've been in the water, agriculture, and environmental sector for the past 24 years. Just to kickstart the process, we need to acknowledge the fact that South Africa falls among 30 driest countries in the world, and we have got the responsibility to make sure that we use our water resources in a very, very efficient and sustainable manner. Over and above that, from Water Research Commission perspective, we derive research and development and innovation addressing water challenges that we are facing, and also dealing with sanitation stuff. But over and above that, we also have got the responsibility to make sure that we partner with key strategic partners, especially for implementation, which means that the research outputs that we generate should assist to make sure that policymakers are coming up with policy or strategies that's is based on latest science. So we work with all key strategic sectors, but over and above that, we also have got the responsibility to make sure that we come up with technologies or decision support tools that will assist us to address water challenges in the country. We are doing this based on the fact that climate change or high extreme climatic events pose serious challenges across climate sensitive sectors. And over and above that, the fact that our population increases annually. Currently, we are sitting at 60.6 million people. You ask yourself, how do we make sure that we produce enough food without constraining the system, and how do we make sure that we provide the water and energy without hindering or squeezing the physical pocket. So all these issues form part of some of our decision support strategies that we are driving as an organization. But over and above that, we also need to make sure that we assist vulnerable communities by making sure that they build strong adaptive capacity and making sure that we move away from high-intensive economy to low-carbon economy. So there are various initiatives that are taking place, but I think I will put some of those ideas as time progresses. Thank you.
So my presentation, I propose to discuss the water situation in South Africa, problem statements and proposed solutions by the Department of Water and Sanitation. In a nutshell, South Africa, according to the World Bank Group's findings, will be unable to afford to reach the Sustainable Development Goal 6 and the targets by 2030. That is the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. And also, according to the National Water and Sanitation Master Plan, a funding gap of 333 billion rand is anticipated over the next 10 years and a projected 70% water deficit by 2030. It is right to say that South Africa is facing a water crisis. According to the mission statement of the Special Rapporteur on Toxins and Human Rights following his site visit to South Africa in 2023, he stated that South Africa faces the crude legacy of environmental racism that is water and chemical pollution, which still imposes a heavy toll, especially on disadvantaged communities. Overcoming it, he said, will require significant additional efforts, including structural, legislative, economic, and environmental challenges. According to the South African Human Rights Commission's inquiries into the sewage pollution of the Vaal River and the rivers of Tshwane, it found that failing wastewater treatment works is a problem nationwide, and that the pollution of South Africa's water resources is dire and widespread, and for that reason it directed that the situation should be declared a national disaster. In terms of the National Water and Sanitation Master Plan of 2018, between 1999 and 2011, the extent of main rivers in South Africa classified as having a poor ecological condition increased by 500%, with some rivers pushed beyond the point of recovery. I now also refer to the section highlighted in yellow. More than 50% of South Africa's wetlands have been lost, and of those that remain, 33% are in a poor ecological condition. In terms of the National Eutrophication Management Strategy, which was launched today, South Africa itself has some of the most highly enriched surface waters in the world. It already is having a significant impact on economic growth and the well-being of South Africans. Now, with regards to the Green Drop Report, which was published in 2022, 40% is in a critical state, 64% of our wastewater works is in a poor or critical state. The findings of the Blue Drop Report is that it is not microbiologically safe to drink the water in almost half of our drinking water systems, and according to the No Drop Report, 47% is estimated to be non-revenue water. Non-revenue water is water that is billed but not paid for, or water that is not billed, or water that is lost through leakages from pipe systems. Now, the challenge that had been identified in a presentation by the DG of Department of Water and Sanitation to the Water and Sanitation Sector Leadership Group in July and November 23 indicated the challenge. The challenge is a rapid and unsustainable build of sector debt at 3 levels. Some of the solutions that have been proposed is, and I refer to this second bullet point, it mentions that it will include the solutions, consistent enforcement of water restrictions on non-paying municipalities, and legal processes to attach municipal bank accounts where necessary. The same presentation of the DG of DWS mentioned too that 12 billion rand had to be provided in the form of grants to poor performing municipalities, that is 12 billion rand per annum. But the DWS is repeatedly providing these municipalities with grants because of infrastructure that is not maintained and deteriorates again rapidly. Some of the proposed reforms is the amendment to our Water Services Act, which is currently under public participation or consultation. I highlight the section in yellow. The minister may force the separation of a water service function from a municipal authority, that is the municipality, where there is persistent failure to meet license conditions, and that it will appoint a water service provider, which may be a private company, an NGO, or CBO. Some of the other proposed amendments include, for example, that no person may operate as a water service provider without being granted an operating license. And if a water service authority is not in compliance, the minister may rectify the non-compliance at the cost of the water institution. And the last bullet point, it may also result in the revocation of a license. So there is a differentiation now between, or proposed differentiation between the water service authority and the water service provider. I'm now going on to mining impacted water and acid mined water, since it is widely recognized that it is responsible for the most costly environmental and social economic impacts. It may continue for many years after mines are closed. Therefore, a mine water management policy had been published in May 2022, and some of the key considerations is the apportionment of liabilities and application of the retrospective liability, that is the polluter pays principle, the optimum use of appropriate and cost-effective technology, that is a technology that leaves little or no residuals, the classification and differentiation of mines. Category A mines are coal and gold mines since they are acid producing. And then the last bullet point, number 10, the reuse of treated mine water, including acid mine drainage. The proposed national mine closure strategy also addresses some of these challenges. That is the transformation of environmental liabilities, including mine impacted water and acid mine water drainage, into economic assets in a timeous and structured fashion, that is during life of mine, creating independent institutions that can manage the latent impacts of mine closure into perpetuity. That would mean the pumping and treatment of extraneous and polluted water, and also economic diversification of mining assets. The proposed amendments to the National Water Act will include that all open cast mining and underground mining which may lead to acid rock drainage or acid mine drainage is prohibited, particularly for those water source areas which are threatened by or vulnerable to mining, and that of course has a retrospective application as well. Why are strategic water sources so important? It's because it supports 50% of the population, 64% of our national economy. So what is the conclusion that we can reach? That active citizenry and social activism is necessary for democracy and development to flourish, to raise the concern of the voiceless and marginalized, and hold government, business, and all leaders in society accountable for their actions. Activism is, of course, not for the faint-hearted. In the words of Charles Mackay, he who has mingled in the fray of duty must have made foes. If you have none, small is the work that you've done. You've never turned the wrong to right. You've been a coward in the fight. So crises such as the water crisis also brings opportunities, and that is exemplified in the last quotation from John F. Kennedy, where it was stated, when written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. The one represents danger and the other represents opportunity. Thank you very much for attending and listening to the presentation. Thank you.
I thank you very much for both of the speakers for sticking to the time. I would just like to summarize what we've heard, some very, very deep insights there. So let me just consult my notes here. First thing, from a tipping point perspective, is what the Water Research Commission has highlighted there, which is the water, energy, food nexus. It's a very important issue because the water, energy, food nexus is of great national strategic importance. And the question is going to very soon arise whether South Africa can continue to be nationally self-sufficient in water, nationally self-sufficient in food, and nationally self-sufficient in energy, because it's very clear that we cannot have all three of those simultaneously. This is a very, very complex issue. It's the most definitely a tipping point issue. It's something that really, in my view, does not receive anywhere near enough attention by our policymakers. In fact, I've actually not heard of or read any significant policy developments in these three areas, certainly not in the last decade. So in my professional opinion, this is something of great importance. That's something that the Water Research Commission is now starting to blaze the trail on. Mariette Liefferink spoke about some very important matters as well, and I'd like to just highlight a few there. The eutrophication program in South Africa is one of enormous, enormous importance. We've got the most eutrophic waters certainly in Africa, possibly in the world, and we've got a whole lot of issues coming out of there from a tipping point perspective. One of them is the fairly recent discovery of at least 2 new species of cyanobacteria. And those cyanobacteria are producers of toxins that are potent toxins. And the funny thing about these two new cyanobacteria species is that they are coming into our systems because of changing ecological circumstances. And one of them could be, and I say could be because we haven't yet fully established it, the changing of the alkalinity status of receiving aquatic ecosystems as a result of the neutralization of acid mine drainage. So when you neutralize acid mine drainage flows, you change the pH of the water, you change the alkalinity of the water, and it's that changed alkalinity that is now allowing, at least we think at theoretical level, allowing these two new species of cyanobacteria to come in. And the significance of these species is they're coming in very quickly, and they have got a comparative advantage over the other dominant species, which are the blue-greens that we have at the moment. And one of these species is a red algae. So it's not inconceivable in the not too distant future that we are going to see rivers turning red. These are known as, the species that's concerned is known as sanguinea. And sanguinea is based on the Latin word for blood, which is sanguis. So sanguinea, literally, we might well see some of our highly eutrophic systems running red, and there could, in fact, be a relationship there with the receiving waters from partially treated acid mine drainage flows. So that's an important thing. The second thing that is raised by Mariette, which is also, in my view, of absolutely critical importance, is the growing debt burden of our municipalities, and in particular, our water boards. Our water boards are burdened to the point of not being able to stay afloat in the not too distant future. That has got grave implications for the rest of South Africa. And then, of course, I've just mentioned this acid mine drainage crisis that has been unresolved. Mariette and myself have worked with that for many, many years, but it's unresolved. So I'd like to thank those speakers for what they've raised today. I've got to check where we are on the schedule here. We've got time. Right. So thank you very much for sharing those insights. I'm going to just quickly stand in now for Professor Kassan, who could not make it. I'm just going to give a little bit of an insight into what the human health implications are. Now, the human health implications is something that we haven't really discussed. Certainly, there's been very little public debate about this. And when talking about human health implications, I'm always acutely aware of not creating alarm, or not fanning the flames of fear, because I'm not an alarmist by any stretch of imagination. But as a scientist, I belong to a movement known as Pugwash. Pugwash is a movement that was started by Albert Einstein and Bertrand Russell, and when they were learning how to split the atom to create the atomic bomb. And they created a thing called the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, which I subscribe to as a scientist. And what it essentially says is that if a scientist knows something and fails to act when there's public health implications, then that scientist is negligent. In other words, good science has a moral conscience. And I've always followed that path through life. So I'm treading a very fine line between creating alarm on the one hand and yet meeting my obligations under the Russell-Einstein Manifesto that I just mentioned. So I just want to mention some of the health implications. We release about 7 billion litres of sewage every single day into our rivers and dams. And the purpose of the National Water Act, at its heart, it was to improve the quality of the water resources. And Mariette made very clear in her presentation that many of our rivers and dams have now reached a point of collapse where they can no longer recover. So we can actually state with empirical evidence that the National Water Act has failed. It's failed to meet its objective of improving the quality of water in the rivers and dams. Now we've got to just ask ourselves a logical question. How long can a severely degraded river act as a receiving water body for massive flows of sewage? Let's say 7 billion litres of sewage every day. And let's just say between 80% of that comes back into the system partially treated, or at best, or in some cases, untreated at all, but at best partially treated. How long can we continue without seeing human health implications? And it's only a question of time. We saw just recently in the Pretoria area this whole issue of cholera, where we've now had deaths. Approximately 30 people lost their lives as a result of that, and that can be directly correlated to the management of sewage at a very, very specific wastewater treatment site in Pretoria, that also happens to be the site of a lot of corruption that is currently under investigation by the Hawks and by various investigative journalists, and in fact, it's currently under investigation by legal teams as well, looking for recourse for the human lives that were lost. So this is an important issue, in that particular area. But there's another thing that's also starting to raise its head, and that is the question now of lagoons, particularly at the end of rivers. All rivers eventually flow into the ocean, and when the flow regime has been so altered that the flood pulse has become so feeble that there's insufficient energy in the system to move the sand that's blown over the mouth of the river, then you start getting a lagoon. And that lagoon is a severely altered aquatic ecosystem, but it's the terminal end of everything that happens upstream of it. And we're now starting to see the pooling of sewage in those lagoons. And you must remember that that sewage contains not only human waste, it contains pathogens, bacteria, viruses, but more importantly, it also contains in it partially metabolized medication, particularly estrogen, very high levels of estrogen in it, as a result of the use of estrogen for birth control purposes widely in South Africa. But it also contains partially metabolized antiretroviral medication and, of course, partially metabolized antibiotics. So it is not inconceivable that we are going to start seeing the emergence of multi-drug resistant pathogens coming out of these places. Now, this is potentially alarmist, and this is not my intention. I must be very clear here. I'm not trying to make people scared, but we have some evidence now. There's probably 8 to 10 cases that I'm aware of where people have been in contact with bacteria in the river, where they've either injured themselves slightly, they've cut a foot or a toe or bumped a leg or something like that underwater, and that has created an open wound in which a certain bacteria has entered the body, and that bacteria, and it's known generally as flesh-eating bacteria, has created a lot of problems. And in fact, the most famous case that we have in South Africa is a highly respected gentleman by the name of Professor or Dr. R.W. Johnson, who writes a lot about politics in South Africa. And he lost his leg to necrotizing fasciitis is the technical word. He lost his leg while after bumping it in a lagoon down in KZN. And there are other cases as well. There's cases from the Vaal River where anglers have, for example, lost toes. There's a case of a child that died. There was a case of a woman whose throat was literally eaten out by this flesh-eating bacteria. And I'm aware of a case down in the Western Cape where a lagoon was altered because of the collapse of peat beds as a result of the non-release of environmental flows in a dam that supplies water to a very, very famous holiday resort. So in this case, there were 2 cases that I'm aware of there of young people that were affected, and one of them was a very active young teenage boy who almost lost his leg as well. The infection went right down into the bone, and he required enormous amount of medical intervention. And there's also a case in Durban where a medical doctor was out surfing at Mhlanga Rocks in the ocean. And he also injured himself while surfing, bumped his leg on something, and he also came down with the same type of thing. So in other words, this whole issue of sewage management as a tipping point crisis and as a human health crisis is something of enormous significance in my view in South Africa. And then, of course, we've got the whole thing about cyanobacteria and what cyanobacteria mean, particularly the toxin producers, the anabenas and the microcystins, which are the 2 dominant genera of cyanobacteria in South Africa. And now with this new red algae that's been identified and has been isolated, that's got a whole new type of toxin that is as yet unknown. The implications are as unknown. So, right, so I'm going to thank the speakers for what they've done. We're slightly ahead of schedule, so I think I'm going to keep it like that, because we can now start opening up to questions and answers. So let's quickly pose some questions here now to the specific speakers, and then we'll open it up to the general audience. Professor Mpandeli, the question to you from one of the listeners. Given the industrial pressure and population growth, is it still a possibility that cities and towns can rely for safe and drinking water from open freshwater sources? Over to you, Professor.
I think to answer that question, the answer is yes. We can still. I'm not giving up or losing hope. I think we need to acknowledge that yes, we have got challenges, but those challenges could be addressed if we put our heads together. And the fact that there are various institutions that are addressing water issues, I do believe that if we have relevant technologies, relevant skills, and expertise, we'll be able to overcome the current challenges that we're facing. I'm very positive. I think we will find, sustainable solutions. And I do believe that, we just need to make sure that we keep on, pushing hard and making sure that we work together, as a sector. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. So I would just like to add to that with the rate of pollution that we are putting into our rivers, the rate of change in the rivers, consistent with this notion of a tipping point, the rate of change in our rivers is becoming so rapid that I believe that there's a strong possibility that it will start exceeding our institutional capacity to cope. And I think the points that I've raised about the human health issues today are cases in point. And I think the other important thing to note is that public confidence, public trust in government and in the institutions that provide water, that public trust is under severe pressure at the moment. So we really need to go out of our way to have communication that is honest and accurate from credible leadership. I think that's the important thing, and we can talk about that later on if we have time. Okay, Mariette, I've got a question for you. How can local communities organize to hold local government accountable for the quality and quantity of water?
Yes, first of all, we are a participatory democracy, and apathy, unfortunately, is one of the challenges that we have to overcome. I wish to also refer to the Water and Sector Leadership Group. It's one of the highest groups, and it also influences the actions in our National Water and Sanitation Master Plan. It is lamentable that only 2 NGOs are part of this Water and Sector Leadership Group, important stakeholder group. So first of all, to encourage community members to participate in the Water and Sanitation Sector Leadership Group and the SDG 6 task team, also to become actively involved in catchment management forums. Many of these catchment management forums are very active, and at these catchment management forums, communities can then have access to the water quality data by water use license holders. It certainly will empower them with knowledge. Then I also just want to refer to Section 31 of NEMA, our National Environmental Management Act, where whistleblowers are given protection if they, for example, disclose evidence of environmental risk that would include pollution of our water sources. And this they can disclose to, for example, a committee of parliament, an organ of state responsible for protecting any aspect of the environment, the public protector, the Human Rights Commission, as well as to the news media, one or more of the news media. The news media often is the trumpet for the public to highlight these challenges. I also want to refer to Section 19 of our National Water Act, where again, if there is any pollution, then we can call upon a catchment management agency, or in the absence of that, on the Department of Water and Sanitation to rectify the situation and to demand the money back from the polluters. It can be a wide pool of polluters. Then I also want just to refer to Section 32 and Section 34 of the National Environmental Management Act, where civil society can lay criminal charges to defend constitutional rights. That is on behalf of the public and on behalf of the environment. And if that litigation is not frivolous, unreasonable, or vexatious, then no cost orders ought to be granted. But here I just want to, as a last thought, interpose by stating that given all the work of the Department of Water and Sanitation towards the protection of strategic water source areas in South Africa, much of which non-governmental organizations dedicatedly support and participate in, we, as some of our NGOs, are enormously dismayed and indeed perplexed that the DWS is arguing in court papers that NGOs work towards protection of these strategic water source areas is unreasonable, frivolous, and vexatious, and called for cost orders against NGOs.
Okay, thank you, Mariette. That's very insightful, and I happen to believe that NGOs and civil society is going to increasingly play a role, because what I'm seeing from my vantage point is that the state is failing in many, many places, and in particular at municipal level. And the thing that prevents the state from completely collapsing when we experience state failure, in fact, is civil society. I've seen that in KZN during the Looters' War of 2021, where the absence of the capacity of the state to project power into that power vacuum was rapidly filled by armed militia. In fact, armed militia belonging to various civil society groups. So I'm fascinated as a scientist in how society organizes itself in the face of state failure. And I'm of the opinion that we're going to see in the very near future the emergence of public-private partnerships, which in fact is really a formalized outcome of exactly what you're talking about. And it's those public-private partnerships that are now being spoken about by the president and other very, very senior officials in government. They are actively talking about it simply because the capacity of the state to respond to many of these very complex issues is just not there. Right, I'm going to just answer one other question that was posed, and that's a human health question that would have gone to Professor Kassan, but in his absence, I'm going to answer that question. So the question is, what are some of the health implications posed by the state of water currently, and who is mostly affected? I live in the Ugu District Municipality in KZN, Port Shepstone area. We get our water from the Umzimkhulu River, and Ugu is a highly distressed municipality, and the river is a very, very distressed river as well, the Umzimkhulu River. So we get a lot of turbidity coming through, a lot of suspended solids in the water. It almost looks like soup sometimes, so the way the water comes out of your tap. And what we are seeing here is explosive diarrhea. There's a widespread cases of explosive diarrhea within the community. These are short, sharp, abrupt events. They tend not to be fatal, but they are widespread, and they've got all sorts of implications. So I think that is probably the most profound one at the moment, or the one that's widespread. However, we also see other factors as well that are starting to come out, and one of them is hepatitis A. Hepatitis A is waterborne. It's a waterborne disease, and hepatitis is a very interesting phenomena, because where you have a lot of clinics that deal with TB patients, particularly in areas with HIV, high levels of HIV, you also get lots of high levels of TB. And these clinics deal with these patients, and they've got septic tanks and at the clinics themselves. And these are very often overloaded for the same reasons that I explained earlier on. So hepatitis A, I think, is something that we are likely to see more of in the future. It is as yet a sort of an ill-defined issue. Then, of course, the other thing that is starting to become more and more manifest now is the range of cyanotoxins that are in our water. Now, what cyanotoxins come from blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, and there's a broad range of cyanotoxins. But we've got two in South Africa that we know about. They're both genus specific. So the one is the genus Anabina, and Anabina creates a toxin, or the family of toxins known as anatoxin, which is a very, very potent neurotoxin. You can just go and Google what anatoxin is, and you'll get a lot more information on that. So anatoxins are out there. But the other dominant genus in South Africa is Microcystis. And the species we have here is Microcystis aeruginosa. And this produces a potent toxin called microcystin. And the active element of microcystin is a compound known as, under the acronym of BMAA, beta-methylamino-L-alanine, which is a potent toxin. And the significance of this toxin is that it becomes part of the water molecule once it's released by the organism. So it's not floating in the water, so therefore it can't be removed by ordinary filtration. And that's the big problem with these toxins. They become part of the water column, and they cannot be removed by currently in use technologies. There are technologies available, but those technologies in general are not in widespread use in South Africa. So these are going to require a re-engineering of many of the bulk water treatment plants, particularly those that are drawing water from highly eutrophic systems. And then, of course, there's also an emerging literature which is as yet ill-defined as well, and that is on the aerosolization of these toxins. So where you have these bodies of highly polluted water with high levels of blue-green algae in them, then you get aerosol formation. As bubbles come out of the water mass, the water column, they pop, and as the bubble pops, you get little bits of the toxin become an aerosol, and they blow around. And this, of course, is exacerbated when people are skiing or people are using power boats and what have you, where they create that rooster tail behind the power boat. So aerosol formation, there's an increasing body of literature, as yet still not fully understood, but this is something that's an emerging area of concern in South Africa. So these are the human health implications. There are others as well. I mentioned the necrotizing fasciitis, which is directly associated with saline water bodies. And of course, so we know that all of our rivers are becoming increasingly saline as well. And that's also one of the reasons why we're starting to see a shift in the species distribution of these highly eutrophic river systems, because the salinity and the pH is changing, partly as a result of the attempts to remediate the acid rock drainage flows. So in other words, it's a very complex issue, and these are happening at the very time when our institutional capacity is at best it's weakening and diminishing, and at worst in some places no longer exists in a functional sense. So I'm going to stick now. I'm actually 2 minutes over the time schedule, so I'm going to start wrapping up there now, and I'm going to thank everyone for their very, very valuable contribution in this discussion. I'm going to open it up now for the last couple of minutes to anyone that wants to pose questions. Please feel free to put out any questions that you have in the Zoom chat box, and we will then field them by the panelists. I'm also conscious of the fact that we need to finish at the top of the hour. So Emily, I'm going to hand it over to you to field some of the questions there. Right, the first questions come in there now. One of the emerging trends is that alien and invasive species are increasingly globally introducing, including in South Africa. Strategic water resource areas are located in the Drakensberg, and little is done to control alien invasive species, acacias which deplete groundwater. What effects and plans are in place to assist the host country, Lesotho, to protect the catchments? So I'm going to give this to the good professor from the Water Research Commission. Can you answer that question, please?
Okay, quick one, Prof. Water Research Commission has got few projects focusing on alien invasive species, especially in KwaZulu-Natal and Eastern Cape provinces. We are doing this in partnership with the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. And we do believe that we will try by all means to address the alien invasive issues. Second issue is the fact that, seems like somebody is talking on the side. The other issue that we are also looking at is making sure that, some of the byproducts that are, we are obtaining from those alien invasive species are being used by local communities. And some of them, they are making calls just based on the type of species that they've harvested. We do believe that, this is a long-term, initiatives that Water Research Commission is driving, with the partners, so that at the end of the day, we come up with a sustainable solution. Over and above that, we are also training various community members to clear those alien invasive species, but also making sure that, where there are opportunities maybe for job creation, we should also look at that. We are not doing this alone because, the mandate of the Water Research Commission is to drive research and development and innovation. But when it comes to other socio-economic challenges, we can partner in making sure that we try to provide solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your concise and insightful answer. Right, the second question that's come up is, what are the key priorities and actionable recommendations for policymakers and stakeholders to address South Africa's water challenges comprehensively and sustainably in the coming years? I would like to venture an answer to that, if I may. I don't want to abuse my position of authority here, but I think in my view, probably the single biggest priority is our sewage crisis. This is, in my view, probably the biggest long-term challenge we have. It's going to cost something like, I initially thought it was 1 trillion rand, but I've recently heard that the president has mentioned 3 trillion rand. So certainly a significant amount of money. And of course, this is happening at the very, very time when our taxpayer, many of them are migrating, or the tax base is falling. So that's an important issue, the sewage crisis. And then, of course, the other issue now is on sustaining our institutions. How do we restore the integrity of our institutions? Those, to me, are the key policy recommendations that need to be dealt with.
Thank you very much. Just with regards to a response to the last question, of course, our master plan does address all the actions that are needed for policy changes, for strategy implementation. But I just want to also mention that South Africa is known to be very rich in policies and in strategies and in guidelines, but very poor in implementation. I just want to mention one of the actions within the master plan was that by 2020, that all big polluters should be identified and prosecuted across the country, including municipalities, with a national communication campaign to accompany the action. What we have seen lately is that there are now, if there is non-compliance with directives, the Department of Water and Sanitation are now laying criminal charges against delinquent municipalities, and we hope that in time this will send a very strong message to municipal managers to not behave delinquently and also to address the sewage pollution in our country. May I also just mention that there are many private initiatives at the moment. I am aware of mining companies who are assisting dysfunctional wastewater treatment works with technical advice, even with upgrading and maintenance of wastewater treatment works, such as, for example, the Percy Stewart wastewater works, which has a significant impact on the cradle of humankind, World Heritage Site, and then also of academics. Some of these academics are here today, such as Professor Anya du Plessis and also Professor Richard Meissner, who are assisting mining companies to address the issue of the legacy of acid mine drainage and the legacy of radioactive mine residue areas. Thank you.
Okay, I think to try to answer the question posed by one of the participants, here at Water Research Commission, what we are driving, you know, Prof, you have highlighted at the beginning of this webinar that one of the initiatives that we are driving at Water Research Commission is Water Energy Food Nexus. We are driving this based on the fact that we are trying to break the silo mentality of, sectors working alone, let's say maybe Department of Agriculture sector, not driving activities, not considering the implications from the water or energy or biodiversity sector. And we've managed to come up with the very interesting, recommendations for the past 11 years. And the fact that now we are driving multi or transdisciplinary projects, making sure that, we don't look only on the biophysical aspect, but also looking at the socio-economic issues. These are some of the initiatives that we are pushing very hard, and also making sure that, we move away from theory to practice. We need to do a lot of demonstration in different communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, I think I would like to thank the panelists for their really insightful questions. We have just a few minutes left in the webinar, so it's time for me to start wrapping up. I'd like to express my very sincere thanks to Professor Mpandeli and Mariette Liefferink, both of them very, very highly respected people in their respective fields, for your valuable inputs and significant contributions to this conversation. The next OGRC Tipping Points webinar is scheduled for the 25th of April, where we will be considering how seriously various political parties are taking environmental issues. Please sign up for the OGRC quarterly newsletter and to stay updated on future events. You can find the link in the chat box below. We are also having a webinar on the $150,000 Jennifer Ward Oppenheimer Research Grant next week. If you want clarity on how to go about applying for the JWO Research Grant and gain insights into the kinds of problems that need innovative research solutions, click on the link to the chat box to register. For those who missed any part of this webinar or wish to revisit it, a recording will be updated to the OGRC YouTube channel. That's the Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation group. In addition, a summary of the webinar will also be available on the OGRC website. Once again, I thank you very much for your participation, and we look forward to welcoming you all to the next Tipping Points webinar in April. Thank you and goodbye.